Alice returned home from her morning workout, walked into the kitchen with an easy smile on her face, and saw Eddie already there, sipping his coffee at the counter. She watched him for a moment and then decided it was now or never. Alice began with a brightness that felt slightly forced. "I have some news. I'm taking a little vacation next week. I'm going to Hawaii for 5 days." Eddie blinked, setting his coffee cup down a bit harder than intended. He looked up at her, his expression controlled but surprised. "Are you serious?" he asked. "A friend from school moved," Alice replied. "Camila invited me on the trip. I think I could use some time to recharge." Eddie leaned back, assessing her. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why didn't you tell me you were planning a trip, and why can't we go together?" Alice's face softened as she took a seat across from him. "Oh, Eddie, you know how it is. I just need a little break, a breath of fresh air, a chance to unwind. Just a few days, you know." Eddie stared at her for a long moment, his brows furrowed. He nodded as if he was still piecing together what she'd said. He sighed before responding, "I understand, Alice, but while cleaning up, I found 2 tickets. One with Nick's name on it. Is there something I'm missing?" Alice's smile turned stiff, her laugh unnaturally high. "It's nothing, Nick. My trainer, he's also going to Hawaii. We were talking about it and he mentioned he was already planning to go, so I got us both the discount on the tickets." She chuckled, but Eddie's gaze remained sharp and unreadable, just to save money. "I asked him," Eddie said, his voice measured. Alice leaned forward. Holding his gaze with sincerity, she replied, "Yes, absolutely. Nick's just helping with the fitness events there. There's a whole crowd going to Hawaii for these master classes and fitness programs. It's a great chance to stay active and relax at the same time." Eddie exhaled slowly, his eyes searching her face as if looking for something beyond. Eddie knew there was more to it than what Alice was saying. His gaze settled on her, calm but with a heaviness in his eyes. "Alice, are you faithful to me?" he asked, his voice low and steady, but every word was edged with something unyielding. "What are you saying?" She tried to hold his gaze but faltered, looking away. "Of course, honey. This trip just came together quickly. That's all. I didn't want to upset you by making a big deal out of it." Eddie's expression didn't change. "Then why didn't you tell me before you bought the tickets?" Alice fumbled with her response. Her voice softened as she reached across the table. "Even if I had invited you, you couldn't go. You don't have vacation time for months, right? I didn't see a reason to bother you about it." She tried to meet his gaze with an easy smile, but his eyes held steady and he looked unamused. "I thought we could discuss it, but it seems you're going with Nick." "I'm sorry to hear that." Alice straightened in her seat, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "Honey, please. Nick isn't a lover. He's my trainer. It's just a coincidence he's going. It's not like I'm spending the whole trip with him. I'm going to see Camila. We'll be lying on the beach, swimming in the ocean, catching up on all the silly things we haven't talked about in ages. It's just a girl's trip, really." Eddie let out a long breath and nodded slightly. "All right, Alice. It's your decision. You've made it, do. What do you want?" His voice was quiet, and Alice felt a strange sense of unease as she looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. "Darling, you're not offended, are you?" she asked hesitantly. Eddie's face remained impassive, and his tone turned clipped. "Men don't get offended," he said, pausing for a moment before standing up and heading out. Eddie said, "I've got to get to the auto repair shop." He put on his jacket and told me that the brake pads need changing. Then he was out the door and down the hall. He got into his car and drove away after his stop at the auto repair shop. He parked a few blocks away at a small cafe. Justin was waiting for him. Justin had been working as a private investigator for about 2 years. He had a slight grin on his face as he waved Eddie over. "Eddie, how's it going? It's been a while, so how's life treating you?" Trainer Justin's smile faded as he exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. Eddie, it's only been 2 weeks since you asked me to look into this. I've gathered some info, but it might not be enough for you yet. I've got enough on what he does. There was a scandal with one client, though it was hushed up so his reputation didn't take a hit, but it made waves for a while. Go on, Eddie urged, his voice low. I followed them both. They only seemed to meet at the gym, but I managed to get a couple of photos of them saying goodbye after workouts. Take a look. Justin pulled a few photos from a folder and handed them across the table. Eddie stared at the images. In one, Nick was leaning in close to Alice, his hand on her shoulder. In another, he leaned in, smiling, and kissed her on the cheek, just a little too close to her mouth. His hand just pointed out, seems friendly enough, but that hand placement, it's a bit suggestive. Eddie's jaw clenched as he examined each photo. Something inside him twisted uncomfortably. He looked up at Justin. His voice was steady. What else? At least on the surface, but there were these subtle touches that were intimate and Alice seemed to like it. She'd laugh, smile and always look like she was enjoying herself. Eddie's face grew darker, but he kept his composure well. Justin, here's the next piece of the puzzle. Alice is going to Hawaii in 2 days and she claims she said she was going to visit her friend Camila, but she bought 2 tickets, one of which has Nick's name on it. She's made up a story about a fitness event and a discount, but I don't believe it. Justin raised his eyebrows and said, You've got every reason to be suspicious. Justin's eyes widened as he saw the $150,000 in cash. That's not a beach trip budget, he said. This gets more interesting by the minute. Eddie could see that Hawaii could be the perfect place to catch them in the act. I'll get everything on camera if they're up to anything, he said. Eddie nodded grimly. Good. I need hard evidence. Justin agreed. It's the only way to make her see what she's done. He added, I want her to understand that lying and cheating. None of that is without consequences. Justin's face was serious, but he couldn't help grinning a little as Eddie added, Here's a little extra. You'll get a kick out of us. I swapped her cash for counterfeits. Justin laughed. Why'd you do that? Just a lesson, Eddie said, his lips curling into a slight smile. She'll still use the card for the hotel and expenses, but she'll be counting on that cash for whatever else. She's planned a little surprise to remind her that betrayal has its cost. Justin chuckled, shaking his head. All right, Eddie. You've got yourself a partner on this. I'll make sure she remembers this trip to Hawaii for a long time before you find out what happens next. He paused, then added, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. A few days later. Alice stood at the front door, a bright smile on her face, as she leaned in to kiss Eddie. Bye, see you soon, darling. She whispered, squeezing his hand. Eddie smiled warmly, playing the role of the loving husband perfectly. Have an amazing time, sweetheart. That's nonsense. The attorney is known for his precise approach in high-stakes divorces. When Eddie walked into the office, he got straight to the point, explaining everything about Alice's behavior, the recent money withdrawal and her trip with Nick. I'll have more than enough evidence of her betrayal, he said firmly. But it's not just about the divorce. I want consequences for Nick. He's not getting away from this. I want to destroy his reputation. Mr. Daniels nodded and listened carefully. Eddie, you've done your homework. I don't see this going any other way but in your favor. We'll make sure the entire process is as smooth as possible for you and rough for them. I was keeping an eye on Alice's activities in Hawaii at first and everything seemed to be as she described. She met up with Camila and the two spent a fair bit of time together. Alice was attending fitness events and Nick seemed to keep a polite distance, though it was clear they shared more than just a casual friendship. She acts like she's just with her friend most of the time. Justin reported over the phone, but trust me, there's more to it. There's more to it than meets the eye. It's clear that Alice is trying to keep things professional with Nick in public. Nick is popular with girls and women. I don't think Alice is sure she can own it. That's probably why there's a distance between them for now. Eddie grunted. Of course she's treating me like I'm her fallback plan. She's playing both sides on the 4th day. Justin's update took a more damning turn. He got some photos and videos. Justin said that Alice and Nick were all over each other in the pool this afternoon. They were hugging and kissing, and it looked like they were getting pretty close. Then Nick headed to her room after dinner. He stayed there all night. Eddie's stomach was twisted up as he imagined the scene. He felt a dull ache of betrayal, even though he'd prepared himself for it. He thought Justin was instructing him to keep the surveillance going for the remainder of the trip. He wanted to know every detail and have every piece of proof. Eddie started packing, box by box. Finally, he logged into their joint account and withdrew the remaining balance. He planned every detail and prepared every piece of the puzzle. The next day, Eddie's phone rang. It was Alice. Her voice sounded unusually somber. "Honey, I have some bad news," she began. "Camila had an accident. She slipped by the pool and hurt her ankle pretty badly. I can't leave her like this, so I'll be staying a couple of extra days to help her out." Eddie gritted his teeth, forcing warmth into his tone as he said, "Of course, Alice. I understand you'd never abandon Camila in a situation like that. Take all the time you need." Alice sighed, a hint of relief in her voice. "Thank you, Eddie. I knew you'd understand. You're the best." After hanging up, Eddie sat in silence for a moment, a small smile on his face. He knew Alice was lying about Camila being injured. That story might have worked on someone else, but not him. Just as he was thinking this over, his phone buzzed again. It was Justin. Justin said without preamble, "I spent the morning with Nick planning something for the next few days. I heard them talking about renting a small yacht and having a few days." Eddie replied, "Of uninterrupted fun. Alice told me that her friend Camila hurt her ankle." Justin was quick to respond. He said, "Alice has been spending the last few days with Nick, and Camila hasn't been around." Eddie called his lawyer, Mr. Daniels, to give him the latest updates and hand over all the materials Justin had gathered, including photos, videos and recordings of Alice's plans with Nick. Mr. Daniels reviewed the evidence and gave Eddie the thumbs up. He said the divorce papers would be ready by tomorrow and they'd be able to start proceedings against Nick. "By the time we're done, he'll have handled all of his professional misconduct complaints." Eddie was pretty pleased with himself as he thanked his lawyer, but the day still had one last surprise in store. That evening, his phone rang once more. It was Justin's number, and Eddie answered, curious. "You'll love this," he said. "I was just about to wrap up when I saw Alice and Nick heading into one of those high-end boutiques. She wanted to buy him something expensive, and here's the best part, she tried to pay with that cash you swapped, and the staff caught on to the counterfeits immediately." Eddie could barely hold back a laugh. "You're kidding." "Nope." It turned into a whole scene. They brought in the manager, then the cops got involved. She was absolutely humiliated. Nick got nervous when the police showed up. Eddie chuckled. He felt a sense of vindication. Let them squirm for a change. As he hung up, Eddie couldn't shake the feeling that everything was going to be okay. Everything was falling into place just as he'd hoped. When Alice returned home a few days later, she was understandably frustrated and tense. What was supposed to be a few days of relaxation with Nick had turned into an absolute mess. The scandal over the counterfeit bill was still fresh in her mind, and she was already strategizing how to address it with the bank. Her trip to Hawaii had been expensive and now she had no idea where to replace. Alice was missing money, but right now, all she wanted was to drop her bags at home, change, and get to the bank to straighten things out. She opened the door, expecting the usual chaos, but something was wrong. The house felt empty. She paused, frowning, as she scanned the living room, noting the absence of Eddie's usual clutter. A quick search confirmed her worst fear: his things were missing. His clothes, his books, even his toothbrush in the bathroom, they were all gone. Panicked, Alice pulled out her phone. Alice called Eddie's number. He answered after a few rings. His voice was calm and almost cold. "Honey," she began, forcing her voice to be calm and collected. "What's going on? Where are you?" I have 2 pieces of news for you, he replied. News item number 1, in about an hour, a courier will be there with your divorce papers. News item number 2, in 2 hours, a realtor will arrive because I've put the house up for sale. So please, Alice, be a good girl and be ready. His words hit her like a slap. She stammered, her mind racing. Eddie, what the hell are you doing? Alice, I know all about your vacation with Nick, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. Alice was so shocked she couldn't even get out a hello. Her heart was pounding and her breath was coming in short gasps. Before she knew it, tears were streaming down her face. She was still reeling from Eddie's calm, distant words and the awful realization that everything was unraveling, her vacation, her secrets, and her life. It was all coming undone so fast, she couldn't even keep up. Divorce proceedings began in court and the courtroom proceedings were pretty intense for Alice. She was sitting across from Eddie, who had once seemed so confident, was unraveling. Piece by piece, evidence was laid bare. Eddie had spared no detail. As Alice watched photos, videos, and even recordings reveal her betrayal, she felt a deep shame settle in. She'd always prided herself on her cleverness and her ability to keep things discreet. But here she was, utterly exposed, her schemes stripped bare in front of strangers, including her own husband. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Eddie's lawyer, Mr. Daniels, expertly presented each piece. The evidence painted a clear picture of deceit and disrespect. She saw her interactions with Nick, the touches, the lingering glances, the kisses, all laid bare on the screen. It felt as harsh as a spotlight. As the final pages of their marriage were laid open for the court, Alice realized she had lost. She hadn't just lost Eddie, she'd lost any semblance of respect others might have once held for her. After the initial shock wore off, Alice's mind began spinning around to another problem, the counterfeit cash, the $155, the fake bills had left her with a tangle of unresolved issues. She wondered uneasily if Nick might have set her up, though she had no proof. Whatever the truth, Nick had cut off all contact, blocking her calls and disappearing without a word. The last she'd heard, his reputation had taken a hit. He'd been forced to resign from the fitness club after being accused of exploiting his position with clients. Eddie and his lawyer didn't stop at the gym. They filed complaints with every sports association they could reach, painting Nick as a predator who used his profession for personal gain. Nick couldn't find any place to go. He was willing to hire him, so he left, returning to Eastern Europe in shame with no choice but to start fresh, far from where he'd once thrived. When the judge finally ruled in Eddie's favor, awarding him most of their shared assets, Alice sat still, her mind numb. Their home was already listed, and her share was split down to a fraction. It was a crushing defeat for her. Eddie had taken everything she valued, her security, her reputation, and her lover. Eddie felt a bittersweet satisfaction as he left the courtroom, finally free from the betrayal that had shadowed him. He'd won a large portion of their shared savings and his self-respect. He had respect for her, but there was an emptiness in his chest that no court victory could fill. The woman he had loved was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. It was hard to erase the memories of that love in the year that followed. Eddie tried to move on, but the echoes of their past lingered, haunting him in quiet moments and forcing him to face the undeniable truth. He had loved her deeply and a part of him had hoped they would be able to grow old together. Now he was left to rebuild. The victory felt hollow, the property and money a cold reminder of what he'd lost. The betrayal had left a wound that only time could heal. Eddie knew it would take a long time to find peace. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. Your thoughts mean a lot, so drop your reactions in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Wishing you all a fantastic day and the best of luck.